McKinsey & Company presented an article about 10 digital and analytics domains in life sciences industry. Today, we will talk about what we have learned helping our clients leading digital and analytics transformations in some of these domains. We hope you find these presentations insightful. Let's start with introduction of our presenters. I am Bhavik Shah, Solution Associate Partner in Charlotte office in US. I am leading digital and analytics product building globally for pharma practice in the firm.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yash Gautam. I'm a partner from our Brussels office. I lead our work on precise real-time HCP engagement, and as part of that, I have led multiple digital transformations on the commercial side with several clients of ours over the past couple of years.
Hi, everyone. Erica Stanzel. I'm an associate partner in the Zurich office. I lead our firm's evidence generation efforts with a particular focus on real-world data and precision medicine.
Hi, this is Jeff Lewis. I'm a senior partner in our New Jersey office, and I lead McKinsey Technology for Life Sciences. And through my work with clients across the industry, I deeply appreciate how technology, the talent, the assets, the data, ways of working form the backbone of any digital aspiration. And I look forward to the discussion today.
Hi, my name is Jason Bello. I'm a partner in Washington, D.C., and I lead our digitally enabled business building practice for the sector.
Some of you may remember this. This is a classic Lean book that was published in early 1990s. Lean completely transformed multiple industries and was seen as a source of competitive advantage for decades for the companies that mastered it. We think digital transformations are going to do exactly that for decades to come. And if that's how you see it too, the choices you make during these transformations would be fundamentally different. Next page, please. So let's talk about what does digital mean for you. If you ask 20 executives, you will get 40 different answers on this question. We think it boils down to 4 opportunities. First, digital and analytics can create radical productivity gains by transforming your core business. It can help you unlock new business streams or revenue streams for your company. Embracing digital and analytics can help modernize tech foundation of your company, or you can choose to upskill your workplace to be digital native company. What we are finding is many companies try to do a bit of everything that we laid out here. We highly recommend doing more of 1 to 2 things, staying really focused, doing 1 to 2 things, and then what's needed for others is the way to go. That's where we see many companies see the success. Next page, please. Is digital important? We think that question is answered. We surveyed more than 100 executives in life sciences industry, and we find that 97% of them said either they are already doing some kind of a digital transformation or planning one already. So I and us, we clearly see that this is something top of mind for life sciences executive. If we go to the next page, please. So then what important question is, what does it take to be successful? After studying thousands of transformations, McKinsey & Company have learned there are 6 success factors that are important to consider. First, this needs to be business-led technology roadmap. That is business backward rather than technology forward initiative. This is critical. Beyond that, you need to focus on building 4 capabilities: talent, agile processes breaking silos, cloud-based tech stack, and appreciation of data as an asset. These are 4 fundamental capabilities that the companies will need to focus on. And then finally, this needs to be scaled to support full domain and not just one or two use cases to derive full impact potential of the transformation. We have seen that sometimes companies and executives focus on a couple of use cases, pilot them, and then they never take the next step. And that's the main reason that sometimes they see that the full potential is not achieved. Next page, please. So finally, here are the 10 domains discussed in the article that was published last year, sometime around August. We will talk about 4 of those domains today: personalized HCP engagement, integrated evidence generation, technology modernization, and new business building. Without further ado, let's get into more exciting part of this presentation with my colleagues.
Thanks, Bhavik. If we can move on to the next slide. I'm actually very glad to talk about this topic of personalized engagement, which I think, is a topic which I think, most of us would have experienced, given everything that happened in 2020. If you can move on to the next page, I think, 2020 was an exceptional year, right? We saw so much change around us, and, particularly on the way pharmaceutical companies were engaging with HCPs, there was actually a sea change, right? With several people saying that, the amount of change that was witnessed in terms of digital adoption, it was, unprecedented. And essentially, I think what we saw in terms of the changes that, the environment, presented, you see them being categorized in these 3, areas. I think the first piece was around the evolution of the digital healthcare ecosystem. And there, I think what we saw was, telemedicine, which was seen as a luxury pre-COVID, suddenly became business as usual. There was significant change in how HCPs were engaging with their patients, how patients were thinking about if, when, and how they should be engaging with their prescribers. So I think on the ecosystem as such, there was significant change. We also saw that the HCPs' engagement preferences evolved tremendously. And here I think what we saw was, with the lockdowns being imposed, the lockdowns being relaxed, at different points in time across the world, face-to-face access was constrained somewhere in the range of 20 to 80%, depending on the market that you choose. And not only was this restriction time bound, it was also something which was varying pretty much on a weekly basis, which actually meant that the way you wanted to engage with your HCPs had to be actually very, very dynamic. And even now, as we look across different markets, there are different sets of restrictions that are likely to continue as different markets plan through their path emerging from COVID. I think the third category of change that we saw was around the information consumption behavior, where we saw that people, at least in the initial onset of COVID, they had a very different approach towards how they were seeking information. Emails became very popular, webinars became very popular, and thereafter there was a phase where there was an overload of emails, overload of webinars, and where HCPs, they started seeking much more relevant and personalized content. And as a result of that, if we can go on the next slide, at least the view that is emerging in our experiences, almost every pharmaceutical company is doing a lot of stuff on digital, right? I would not say that there are companies which are sitting back and waiting for the old world to come back. But having said that, as we look at the future, personally, what we have seen is that there are 4 key topics that one should keep at the top of their mind. I think the first piece is on how do we systematically figure out how we should interact with our HCPs at the right time with the right topics. And the reason why it's becoming more important is because in several markets, what we are seeing is that the quality and the availability of access is contingent on the channel that you're choosing and the topic that you're likely to bring. I think the second piece, which is becoming very important, is how do we actually create the right experience towards the HCPs based on the engagement that they would be having with us as pharmaceutical company. It's no longer just about the product that we are carrying together with us and talking about the product, but it's much more about what is on top of HCPs' minds and how are we going to actually help them make better clinical decisions that will help them deliver better value to their patients. I think the third piece, which is also becoming very important as we look at the future, is this notion of trying to rapidly and in an iterative manner, figuring out what actually works, right? Because the needs are evolving, access is evolving, the environment is evolving, and hence the idea of us having a perfect solution that is likely to resonate across physicians for a long period of time is probably not likely to hold. And hence, I think the ability to pick the pulse of the market quickly, come up with a refined value proposition, test it out, and scale becomes again something which is very, very important. And then the last piece is around talent, right? Because essentially the way the industry is evolving, the kind of talent that we would need in order to deliver on the next generation engagement model that we aspire to have towards our HCP, it's going to be somewhat overlapping, but also somewhat different from the kind of talent that we today have. So how do we actually think about that? Now, that's, I think, where we see some of the big questions residing. If we can move on to the next slide, at least our view is what it takes to actually get there is anchored on these 5 components. The first piece is on precision engagement. Here, the idea is how can we actually figure out what is the best possible mechanism for us to engage with our HCPs, which is likely to create the most impact, right? And that's, I think, the first piece. The second piece is around doing better remote engagement, right? Remote engagement, whether we may believe or not, whether it's 70%, 60%, 30%, 20%, that I don't think matters as much. But I think where there is still a growing consensus is that remote engagement is likely to stay in some shape and form, whether it's digital, whether it's something else, still to be figured out. But remote engagement is likely to stay. If we look at historically, I think our engagement model was geared towards primacy to face-to-face. Going forward, that may be true for several physicians, but we need also to have a view on what would be our remote engagement, platform that allows us to do this at scale and at high quality. The third piece is around having a clear interface towards the HCPs. And here the notion is, how do we ensure that what we provide to the HCP is consistent, homogeneous experience that allows them to meet the needs that they have, rather than trying to approach them in silos as a pharmaceutical company. And then the fourth piece that you see on top is basically around content, right? Which is around how do we actually ensure that we are not bringing content that we are excited to talk about, but rather we are bringing content that actually is going to make a difference in how our HCPs, are going to act and use our product in their day-to-day practice. And at the back of all of this, right, the big change, at least in my mind, is that, there is a significantly prominent technology enablement, right? As we think about, the different platforms that are coming into place, as we think about analytics engines, et cetera, there is going to be a significant technology enablement across each of these. So that, in a nutshell, is at least, our view on how we see personalized engagement evolving. Maybe just to give you a bit of a flavor around what each of these areas entail, if you can move on to the next page. I think precision engagement, in our mind, entails the 4 components that you see on the left. The first piece is on focusing on physicians who are most responsive to an engagement, and by most responsive, what I mean is physicians who actually value an engagement, and more importantly, also engaging with them in a mechanism that they value. So it's not just about they valuing the engagement, but also the mechanism in which they value the engagement. I think there is definitely something to be thought about sales teams, where the notion is how do we actually optimize the customer facing roles to ensure we can deliver the impact and meet the aspirations of our HCP, as we talked about before. There is also a notion of how do we move from being in a rep first world to actually moving to a world where the rep is playing an orchestrator, and we are focusing much more on the HCP. So it's much more an HCP back view rather than a rep forward view. And then I think the last piece is on, rather than having a one size fit all approach, for a product or for multiple products, how do we actually customize our approach based on the product life cycle, as well as the kind of competitive dynamics that our products face in the marketplace. If we deep dive into the second topic, right, which is around remote interaction, I think there is a notion of how do we actually use remote channels to go and get access to HCPs who conventionally we would not have covered in a face-to-face visit. So I think there is a strong component of enhancing reach. There is an element of how can we formalize remote selling, because more and more feedback that several of you would have received from your commercial organization says we want to do remote selling, but are we effective at doing remote selling? And there, I think there is definitely something to be thought about. How do we, enhance the capabilities of our frontline so that they become as good and as seamless as doing remote engagement as they are in doing face-to-face engagement. And then, of course, there are a bunch of things on how do we create the right assets, the right platform that allows the frontline to be as effective in remote engagement as they are used to in the face-to-face setting. If you move on to the next page, right, just to hit on the last couple of points, I think as we talk about clear coordinated HCP interface, here I think the notion is how do we create a single quarterback contact, right? And here the challenge from which we are coming from is being in a situation where multiple people from the same pharmaceutical organization engaging with the HCP, and frankly there not being great communication of what is the kind of conversation that is actually happening. And as a result of that, the challenge is that the HCP experience towards the pharmaceutical company is something which is very siloed and often broken. And here the notion is how do we actually create some kind of orchestration so that what we do vis-a-vis the HCP as an organization makes a bit more sense and is a bit more tied up. Then I think there is a second piece which is around moving away from purely having an approach of quote unquote selling a product, talking about how do we actually create the right experience. And that I think is something which is very, very important. And then the last piece is around, how do we, systematically and rapidly measure HCP experience and satisfaction and work on that in order to be in a continuous improvement mode. And then the last piece is around content, right? And here the notion is, how do we actually move from, standardized content to content which is relevant to what the HCP seek. Secondly, I think there is a notion of how do we improve the quality and the format of content in order to ensure that the relevance of the content as well as the memorability of the content is enhanced. And then I think the last piece is around how do we ensure that the right content reaches the HCP at the right time, depending on, so for example, if you have a new product, what HCPs would like to know is going to be very different after the product has been in the market, for some period of time. How do we actually track that and come up with the right content which is fit for purpose? That's a bit from my side. I hope that it gives food for thought as you think about your next set of personalized engagement approaches towards HCPs.
Great. So I'm going to speak to you all about integrated evidence generation. So if we go to the next slide, I think when we think about evidence generation and its importance in pharma, it's really clear that evidence generation has impact across the entire therapeutic value chain. So if we do this well, we're having impact in our R&D portion of the business, making sure that we understand the unmet need of the drugs that we're developing, that we can identify the right biological pathways of interest, that we have trial designs that make sense and are going to produce the type of evidence that's critical for validating both that the drug works and also making sure that it gets to the right patients. Then as we move along that value chain, we see significant impact in market access as well, being able to show evidence that there's economic value of the drug that we're working with. And in some cases, even being able to expand the label without the need for new randomized control trials. This also has importance in medical and commercial. So, once the drug is out there and in the world, if you will, we can improve pharmacovigilance with effective evidence generation and real world data. We can better differentiate our drugs from others out there in the field to make sure that physicians understand when and why to use our drug and why that's beneficial over maybe other options that they might have. And then, of course, make sure that we have in some cases, effective clinical decision support as well. So really helping physicians inform their decisions, figure out how to leverage the therapy, identify underdiagnosed or undiagnosed patients, etc. So it really does affect our entire value chain. So if we go to the next page. So of course, a big question is, what does good look like when we talk about evidence generation? And here what we're showing is this concept of an industrialized advanced analytics engine that really has its focus in evidence generation. And evidence generation, I should say, is, as you saw from the value chain slide previously, it really is a cross-functional topic. So it's something that matters to almost every part of your business. So you really have to have a way to bring all of those different stakeholders and all of those different components together to make kind of a successful evidence generation output. So this journey starts with the integrated evidence generation plan. So really bringing together that franchise strategy, any precision medicine strategy that you might have, your understanding of the competitive landscape, knowledge of the evidence gaps, so where there are places where you need to do more to generate evidence, or where you would want to understand more in order to make a more compelling case for the drug. That then feeds into what we're referring to here as this advanced evidence generation engine. So this is really the core of what you're using to generate the evidence that you need. From a data perspective, this should be much more expansive than what the kind of conventional way of thinking about evidence generation. So of course you have your randomized controlled trial data. That is a cornerstone of any evidence generation plan. But this should also bring in a number of other different data types. So EMR and claims data, PRO data, literature that can complement, omics related data, registry data, and even someday we might be talking about consumer data or wearables data, other components that can come into really informing how the patient is being treated, how the patient's behaving, and what the subsequent outcomes are. And then as part of that, you also need a number of analytical models that can be used kind of on top of that data. So things that look at disease progression, burden, patient journeys, drug effectiveness. This is only a kind of subset of all the things that you would want to make sure that you were looking at in detail across these different data types. So with that engine, the goal is to then generate what we would call a set of kind of breakthrough insights about that. So we've got a couple of these mapped to the different impact areas, if you will. So from a biological pathway insights perspective, being able to use this data to make novel pathway linkages to identify both the indications that may be more likely to be successful for a particular drug in development, but also the indications that would be more likely to be successful in life cycle management of that drug. So A, giving you the confidence in the indication you've selected for its initial approach, as well as B, giving you the confidence in its lifecycle management indication approach. We would also see here the ability to have a more data-driven understanding of disease biology that can help improve probability of success and confidence in the drug that you're developing. When we think about disease insights, we can use real-world data outcomes to assess head-to-head effectiveness. We can also have granular views on responses of subpopulations and any remaining unmet needs. And then at a customer level, we can optimize treatment protocols, determine adherence, and in particular, better understand switching and why that switching behavior occurs, and how we can be thinking about that in the context of our customers. So again, as I kind of mentioned early on, when we think about the stakeholders that are involved in here, evidence generation, it's not only cross-functional within your organization, so kind of stakeholders from every part of the organization, but it's also very multi-stakeholder from an external perspective too, with patients, payers, regulators, HCPs, kind of everybody who touches the drug or some aspect of drug development being involved. So if we go to the next page. So it really does look and feel different if you apply an advanced analytics approach to evidence generation. So when we think about kind of how these things look from, or feel, if you will, from a more traditional perspective, what we might have been thinking before is, let's validate and confirm a small set of select pre-existing hypotheses, because we can't run that many experiments, and we can only spend so much on the evidence that we generate. But the idea here is to have access to more data, to be able to answer hypotheses now kind of more comprehensively and more at scale, and address many business questions at once across all the different data types and the different analytics that you do. When we think about the insights that we would generate, so in the past we might have said insights are, through traditional approaches, can be time-consuming and often very expensive. If you think that the only way to generate evidence is through a randomized controlled trial, of course that's going to be a very expensive way to generate that evidence. So having access to all these different data types, and in particular advanced analytic tools that help us derive insights from that data allows us to move much more quickly from ideas to insights. In some cases, between 10 and 100 times faster than a traditional method, where you might have had to run a small trial or begin a registry or any number of other kind of more traditional approaches that you would have used. The other one that I'll highlight here as well is what did it look like when we were executing real-world evidence-based use cases before? And I think often the traditional way of doing this is to have a very siloed approach, a kind of very specific real-world evidence use case that has very specific business outputs, and it's done in kind of one part of the functional or one functional part of the organization. And going forward, when we think about doing this effectively, it's much more about enterprise-wide capability and making sure that you have that entire landscape of stakeholders weighing in on the use cases that you do, how you deliver on those use cases, making them multi-purpose to the extent that you can, and really leveraging a broad base set of data across the organization. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of how to think about evidence generation, especially as we move from more traditional methods of evidence generation to more advanced analytics approaches that really take advantage of the exploding scale of data and analytical tools that we are increasingly having access to today.
Great, thank you. Look, achieving digital aspirations laid out by my colleagues and achieving them at scale requires a fundamental retooling of technology. And over the past decade, tech transformation in life sciences has been focused on cost reduction, implementing core systems, and integrating acquisitions. And tech modernization today requires very different approaches with very different goals. If you move to the next slide, in our practice and our service to CIOs across industries, we see 10 critical plays on modernization along 3 vectors. First, reimagining the role of technology in the organization to one that is deeply embedded in every area of the company. This is anchored in a product-oriented model, empowering persistent, high-performing teams across business and technology that build, own, and improve valuable assets that are durable. And second, reinventing technology delivery, advancing ways of working, attracting and developing talent to drive excellence in engineering, and leveraging modern capabilities. This is reshaping vendors into an ecosystem of partners that adapt to your modern model. And third, future-proofing the foundation. Particularly for life sciences, this is breaking through stall at 10 to 20% of footprint on cloud and unleashing data from across the enterprise landscape of systems and vendors. And modernizing technology requires advancements really against all of these areas, typically while starting with a few and building over time. On the next slide, when we look at the cloud opportunity in particular, our research shows that cloud is on pace to unlock $1 trillion of EBITDA by 2030. We do expect efficiency on the back of this from simplifying tech operations and digitizing internal processes, but the outweighed value of this will come from the unlock of innovation. Advanced analytics at scale, faster speed to market, better engagement with customers, some of the things you heard from my colleagues. And also from pioneering new tech-enabled business models, developing concepts, building businesses and testing them at a faster clip. And you'll hear about that from my colleague on digital business building in a moment. And if you jump ahead, it won't surprise you to see that growth in cloud has been tremendous and is expected to scale rapidly. The large majority of CIOs have said that the pandemic has accelerated their plans for cloud, and cloud budgets are expected to double over the next 2 years. When we look at life sciences in particular, more than 80% of industry leaders have called out at cloud as a priority in public statements of an area that they are focused on and will continue to focus on. And when we look across the industry, the value is being realized in pockets with really exciting examples. Cloud-first approaches for all new development, modern tech stacks to engage customers, a better handle of enterprise data, improvements to developer productivity and beyond. Now, I want to come back for a second to the broader themes across technology transformation that I highlighted earlier. Can you please move to the next slide? We see tech transformation reemerging as a priority, as I mentioned, and this version should feel different. More than half of companies have redesigned their operating model in the last 2 years. A third have leaned into some form of a product model, and 60% have taken on some version of tech modernization. However, we also did research with business executives, which say that 2/3 would say that they have not quite seen the improvement from technology in the past 2 years, and their performance on the transformation has not improved over time. The gaps we typically see linked to this are a few. The transformation really happens within technology and happens to the business, not with the business. Secondly, technology is built without the clear link to value. You don't necessarily need to move everything to cloud, but you need to drive value in the business and ensure that the technology roadmap is linked to that. And the third is the change often lands into organizational change without really driving the model change that's required and the capability building that is needed to deliver against the model. So when we look forward, we see technology transformation as a core part of the recipe to achieve the digital aspirations you've heard about today. And this version of technology change needs to look different, with technologists embedded with business partners, leveraging.
Periodically, we take a look at what types of companies and types of skills are driving value creation for the economy as a whole. If we look at what's happening today, we see that business builders are disproportionately creating value. These are companies who step out of the core and create adjacent new ventures that operate with the freedom of a startup, but with the incumbent strength. In an analysis of S&P returns, we have seen disproportionate value creation from younger companies and companies that are serial business builders versus incumbents who stay focused on the core alone. CEOs recognize this. In a survey we conducted last summer, more than half of the respondents list business building as a top 3 priority. This is a 70% increase from just 3 years ago, and COVID has accelerated this further. For some sectors, business building has been existential. This is true during the last decade in the financial sector, where legacy financial institutions face threats from branchless banks. Many sectors, including our own, have had to radically adapt during COVID when in-person communication was impossible. But business building is hard. Incumbents often don't have the right talent, and it can be difficult to compete with hot new startups for the right people. You may find it's challenging to bring true agile ways of working to a legacy organization that's highly matrixed and set in its ways. Even funding a new venture is difficult, as using annual budget cycles just will not work. You have to use the milestone-based funding approach that VCs have adopted. Some companies try to solve these problems by keeping their new ventures at arm's length, but too often then they fall into the trap of not taking advantage of the incumbent's strengths, and the venture is left to compete against much better capitalized startups. If we go to the next slide. So what does it take to be successful? 3 factors stand out. First is the freedom to think differently. New business teams need to be able to operate with independence. They need to have a sphere where the team can make their own decisions. However, complete separation is not the answer either, as the resources of the parent co are critical to the new venture's success. Companies should negotiate boundaries. Within those boundaries, the new venture should have free rein. And outside of them, there should be clear expectations for how to collaborate. This includes with functions like marketing, core tech, legal, etc. Second is a relentless focus on value. Customer centricity and agile methods are at the core of this. In business building, a really well-developed financial model is not the measure of value. Early traction with users, pricing tests, technological proofs of concept, these are the markers of value. And third is doing this over and over. When we partner with clients in this area, we're focused on helping our clients learn by doing. We encourage our clients to develop a business building capability to continuously innovate on their own, well beyond the launch of their first venture. If you go to the next page, our own business building team is made up of 5,000 technical specialists in fields including design, software development, data science, and product management. The team has partnered with clients over the last 5 years to launch over 250 businesses across all sectors and geographies. Within this list, you can see some themes for business building in healthcare. One is around B2B customer engagement and evidence dissemination. We've partnered with a life sciences player to create a novel channel, digitally native, for helping customers ask questions, order supplies, and share feedback. Another theme is the use of data. In one example, we found a way to rescue data that was previously being ignored or discarded. With advanced analytics, we were able to create new commercial value and clinical value for this data. A third theme is around patient engagement. One organization we worked with launched a telemedicine and health services platform that picked up 7.5 million users in the first year. In a separate case, we found ways for a life sciences player to engage with patients longitudinally. And we're not just talking about an app that few people download and even fewer use. We're talking about using passive data, tapping into existing patient journeys, and giving patients what they really want, not what we think they need, to create solutions with high engagement. If you go to the next page, this type of methodology is able to double the returns of a typical VC fund and provide a significant margin lift for the core business. This approach helps avoid the traps of incumbency and brings an obsession with user experience that de-risks any investment.
Bringing this together, we are absolutely inspired by the emergence of these digital battlegrounds across life sciences and the potential to positively impact the industry, healthcare professionals, and patients. We appreciate the time you guys spent with us, and please reach out to continue the discussion. Thank you.